So, welcome. Plastic has become an indispensable material for households, for industry, for medical devices, for logistics, for food storage. And actually it's growing, has grown quite a lot. From the 50s, it has grown pretty much in use and volume as the economy has grown in different markets. The downside with this now is that around 460 million tons of plastic is produced yearly, whereas 350 million tons actually goes to waste. And 11 million tons of that ends up in oceans. And we know that actually this is becoming one of the biggest problems for wildlife, for mankind, and for the planet. And the only thing we can be sure of is that this is actually going to be bigger, because plastic is becoming even bigger in volume in all different markets as they develop. Solutions are available and they are being implemented in terms of technological development, policy interventions, and infrastructure development. And those things are actually delivering results today. So today I have a pleasure to speak with two of the leaders that actually had taken on and addressed these issues in a very good way with their respective organizations. And they are showing a path forward, how these mammoth questions can actually be solved in the future in a positive way. So, my pleasure to introduce Keefe Harrison, founder and CEO of the Recycling Partnership, and Jacob Duer, President and CEO of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. Very welcome, both of you. And today we're going to talk through some of the actual actions we have done and we can do, and actually look at a holistic view on a systematic solution for these questions. And I would like to start with a question about what is the situation today with recycling of plastics in the world. I know that, Jacob, that you and your organization has actually mapped the world in the different levels. Can you speak a little bit about the situation that we find ourselves today?
I mean, it's extraordinary to see how the plastic waste agenda has become one of the key topics of discussion in society today. If we go back to 2015, nobody spoke about this issue. Today, if we open up a newspaper, if we switch on the television, one thing is for certain, and that is we will be told a story around plastic pollution. What is extremely encouraging to see is that this topic has become relevant for policymakers. We see action happening at the level of policy making. Negotiations are underway on a future globally legally binding instrument on plastic pollution. But equally important, we are seeing that industry, the private sector, civil society are all stepping up, wanting to be part of creating solutions in this space. But there is no one solution, and I think the challenge is that the solutions that we are looking to identify, develop and ultimately implement differs from country to country. For the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, which is a global organization, our main focus is on high leakage areas. How can we ensure that the plastic that ends up in the environment today does not end up in the environment but is brought back into the economy through recycling?
I know that you, Keefe, have done quite profound work with this also in the US. Can you speak a little bit about that?
The Recycling Partnership is a US-based nonprofit, and we fill some critical gaps. For decades, the public has known a lot about the concept of recycling, but we haven't had the data to know what happens on each individual level. I have a pop quiz for you all. How many recycling programs are there in the US? Jacob knows.
I know.
All right, how many?
9,000.
9,000 distinct recycling programs in the US. And so we set to work making sure that we could understand what's happening in each and every one of them. Because each one is managed differently, each one is different, each one has a different list of what can be recycled there. And in order to make significant system change in the US, we have to first start by understanding what's happening in each individual place and then draw them together in a harmonized approach.
So building on what Keefe has said around the challenges just in the US, I think if we're looking at it more broadly and globally as well in 190 plus countries, the challenge is tremendous. But what is so encouraging is that with the political backing and political commitment that we see from governments all over the world, solutions are moving forward. I think from an alliance perspective, where our focus is on how do we ensure that systems are being put in place, right? Not only is there not one solution, but there are solutions that need to be addressed differently in all countries in the world. One of the biggest challenges we see when we're talking about plastic waste and leakage into the environment is the fact that more than 3 billion people on this planet, they have no access to waste collection. So we need to ensure that that's provided, and then we need to capture the value that exists within the plastic waste and bring that back into the system through a circular economy.
So what we're trying to marry up here is a systems approach so that all the interventions globally add up to a different outcome. But if we just look at it from an incremental point of view, we will never be satisfied. Because at its heart, recycling is a reactive activity. The way that this entire industry has developed is that innovation has gone into building new and different types of packaging, new and different types of stuff. And recycling has been a couple steps behind, because when there's enough of one thing that an entrepreneur can figure out how to turn into a new thing, then recycling happens. This shift that we're talking about is the circular economy. How do we put thought into what will happen to a material before it's even produced to make sure that it has an end-of-life story that's satisfactory to the public, to policymakers, to companies, and to our planet. And that shift is what's underway right now.
It's also a fact that industry has always started with virgin plastic, isn't it? Not thinking that the raw material of recycled plastic can go into plastic production, or is it so?
Well, right now plastic turns back into plastic, so we're very interested in the recycling partnership of the fate of a material. When something's recycled, we want to know that it turns into something new, and that fate of a new beginning is where we really start our problem solving, and then we work our way backwards from how it's sorted, how it's collected at the household, how the public engages with it. Then we look at the broader picture of how we make that change.
And I think what we are seeing is that companies across the world, they are making strong commitments towards using recycled content, in particular in their packaging, but anything that they do within their respective businesses and corporates. So there's a whole new industry that's actually coming out of this, right? And that is a recycling industry. There are many different types of recycling that exist. In some cases, it's more technology that has been used for years, but in other areas, it's more nascent technology that's being tested and trialed. But there's no doubt that millions, or if not billions of dollars, are being invested into recycling with the aim of ensuring that the value of plastic is contained, brought back into the economy. And this is about circularity, it's about design for circularity, and it's about focus on sustainable use and consumption and production of plastic.
Let's be clear that we cannot recycle our way out of a plastics pollution problem. It is a critical part of the whole picture, but we have to be really intentional when we use plastics, how we look to reuse first, and then recycling plays a critical role.
And we see it in exactly the same way. Recycling is part of the solution, but we need to look at the system changes. And that starts from the beginning until the very end of that plastic value chain, right?
So let's talk about the obstacles for doing the recycling. And I just have a little anecdote from my small village in Sweden, where today I understand that 85% of the plastic that I recycle is actually incinerated. And of course, it's very important that we have faith and trust that, if I do that job, I should know who is doing the next part of the chain. And it's that in a way that I feel really comfortable that people are doing the right thing for the recycling part. How should I think about that?
I've been working in this space for about 25 years now, and the public has never been more interested in what happens to my stuff than they are now. It used to be people put it in the bin and they wanted it to go away. Now they want to know that it's worth their effort and what happens. And there will be more attention to what away means. You want to know what happens to your plastics when you put them in the bin. You're like a lot of people out there. So here's the challenge. Recycling is an essential part of maintaining and protecting our natural resources. And when it comes to the public's engagement about recycling, we need to help them understand that the world is changing. We are making more things recyclable. We are making more recycling happen in more places. And that's why we need to engage the public in that change over time. We've recently launched a new tool called Recycle Check that uses AI technology to allow people to know what's recyclable, where they are in the US at that moment. That's an example of how we're meeting the public with a demand that I want to know the truth of the whole system based on where I am in that moment.
So for you, do you see any issue in that plastic is so many things, from thin wrap to, you know, a deck chair, and it's all plastics. But of course, recycling of those cannot be done in the same way. So how do you see that? Is this an obstacle for success, or do you have the solution for it?
I mean, there are different types of recycling technologies that exist on the market. I think the one that most people know about is mechanical recycling, where we're talking about our PET bottles, where they go in and they're recycled through cutting and ultimately having pellets coming out, and the material is then reused. But where the technology development is happening right now in particular is around advanced recycling, where you're actually taking the plastic waste back to its original monomer. And in that way, you bring that back into the system and then ensuring recycling there. But I think the challenge, again, differs from country to country, I would say even from community to community. The Alliance, again, with our focus in particular on high leakage areas, we are running a number of projects and programs in Southeast Asia where the majority of the plastic pollution into the environment and ultimately into our oceans is happening. So as an example, we are running a program where we will be providing waste management infrastructure to 2.6 million people. And when the program is fully up and running, it will prevent the leakage of more than 50,000 tons of plastic waste into the environment on an annual basis. And here it's about education, right? We need to provide options for the communities, for the households, so that no waste, including the plastic waste, does not end up in the environment. We are providing two bins, a yellow bin and a green bin. We work with the communities, with the households in explaining how the waste has to be segregated already at the level of the household before it's being picked up and put into a centralized sorting place and ultimately sent off for recycling. So without options, we can't solve the problem. So we need to create those options for the households, which is what we are doing, and then we need to create economically viable systems for a circular economy to happen.
I think what Jacob is underlining here is that there are no silver bullets to this. Technology plays a critical role, but we cannot just innovate our way out because there is a human behavior point. We also can't just ask the public to do their job if we haven't built the infrastructure. So when we think of system change, I think of it more in a circle, that we need to make sure that we are envisioning a system in the future where everyone can, everyone does, things are designed for it. The financing has come in place to actually resolve the challenge, and policy plays a critical role. And when you activate all of those pieces at once, you start to see system change. I'm excited about the UN engagement in the plastics pollution space because it's the first time that we're able to talk about a harmonized approach. Having spent nearly a quarter century in this space, we've just been chipping away at baby step solutions, and the public is frustrated, companies are frustrated, policymakers are frustrated. We have to finally create a solution that is on par, as large as the problem, and it's only with policy and engagement on a global scale, like the UN is leading, that we'll actually reach that full-size solution.
But can you speak to an example where this has happened? It could be big or small. I think it's just for me to understand what you mean when you are speaking about the full circle.
We see the beginning of that working. Now, very often I work with companies who want to be able to make something so they can tell the public that it's recyclable. And before they ever get to the point where they put that message on a package, we engage them in starting instead at the end. And we talk about the end as the fate of the material. What does it get turned into? What is its next life? How is it reincarnated into its next being? Only from that do we begin to move our way all the way back to the point when you can tell the public, because you've built that infrastructure. An example of where we've done that, we recently rolled out a new recycling program in Baltimore. It took us years to get the whole program, all the pieces ready. And what we were looking for was, can we ensure that everyone in this community is able to recycle? Not just parts of the community, but everyone. And in building this new recycling program, we worked with the mayor's office, we worked with community groups, but we also worked with companies and like resin producers who donated the plastic resin that was turned into the recycling cart so we could lower the cost overall. And then we at the Recycling Partnership implemented or issued a grant to be able to make sure that everyone in that community could recycle. Again, it took years. And it's one US city. So I see that as an excellent start, but it still is missing some of those critical scaling up pieces that would come from policy. So what's a flip on that on the US? We now have 4 states who have passed extended producer responsibility bills. That says if you're a company selling something in this state, you need to pay a fee to make sure that the infrastructure is there for a comprehensive recycling program. So we're excited to see what's coming forward in Colorado and Maine and Oregon and California. And that's where we'll really see those system change pieces, all of those starting to come together at scale.
You have a couple of great examples in Southeast Asia, Jacob. Could you speak a little about that?
So we are running as an organization more than 50 projects in more than 25 countries. And our main focus when we are talking Southeast Asia is on the leakage, right? Because we see that as the biggest challenge. The numbers are too large in terms of what ends up in the environment and in our oceans. And before we even sometimes start talking about recycling, we need to make sure that the leakage does not happen. So we are running everything from large-scale infrastructure programs to smaller scale solutions where we are supporting activities that collects the plastic waste that already sits in the environment and really making a business out of it. We see new business opportunities emerging. And I think this is an interesting part of this particular topic when we are talking plastic and plastic waste as well, right? So with policies coming out, with political backing from central governments and local governments, we also see financing being coupled with that. So private financing is coming, we see public financing is coming, and we see some of the large development banks also focusing increasingly on infrastructure solutions. I think what the development banks often are looking for are the technical solutions. So they need to couple with partners that on one hand can provide technical solutions that are economically viable, and if we can be a partner with them, then we will see financing flowing.
I think that's a critical role for nonprofits too, to do that risk level of work to problem solve. You know, why hasn't this fixed itself already? If it made good business sense as it was, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So there's an important role of nonprofits injecting grant-based capital in to begin to prove out, to build, so that the investment community can come in to scale. That's where policymakers come in, is to deliver the scale.
I've learned 2 things now the last hour, is that 1, you can actually do it. It's possible. 2, it doesn't have to cost more. It's actually could be a business opportunity also for the players in this. So I think economic incentives is a catalyst in this, I suppose, because it has to start somewhere. Can you speak about how economic incentives play a role here? You already talked a little bit about Baltimore, but maybe you can talk about that as well, Jacob.
I mean, if we're looking at numbers, it's estimated that the value of the plastic waste that ends up in our environment, in incineration, in open dump sites or in landfills today is somewhere between $80 and $120 billion. So that needs to be captured. So there's an economic incentive already built into the fact that if we can create a circular economy, there is money in it, there's business in it. I think what we are seeing, and which is extremely encouraging, is there's a lot of startups in this space as well. From the design part, to alternative materials, to packaging, to waste management, to recycling. And what we're also seeing is that because there's money in it, there is investment that is flowing their way. So the Alliance, over the last 2 years, we have incubated more than 150 startups around the world. And these startups have attracted more than $160 million of investment, right? So the business opportunity is there because there's money in waste, in plastic waste. And if we can continue, as you said, as NGOs, right, as non-profits, to foster that environment, then I'm sure that we can be part of pushing this faster than we otherwise would have seen.
So in our current economy, it's only when the money works that we get the environmental benefits. It's only when that business side plays out that we get to protect the planet. I think if we only lead with will it make money, we will never get a comprehensive solution. There are amazing opportunities to see the innovation and the incubator space drive something new, but we need to make sure that each of those add up to a whole that is truly system change. In the United States, it is more expensive for a community to run a recycling program than a solid waste program. So it is not a business opportunity for them, and that's why we don't see the type of ready advancement that we see in the business side. That's the critical role that policy plays to make sure that we're not just waiting on it to make a good business sense, but that we're putting in the smart capital in the right place to drive that system change. So when I look ahead to the future, what I see as the biggest opportunity is when we get very intentional about common standards that every company must design for, and we really develop an allergy to greenwashing so that there is no gray space of can something be recycled, can something be reused or not. We need to be really clear of is it a yes or a no, and then from there we can build out the system.
But I met quite a lot of congressmen in US and spoke about a lot of different things. And I suppose if there is not an economic opportunity, is there a political opportunity? So I wonder, have you had a chance to meet politicians on federal level as well in US?
Yes, we work on the federal level policy as well as state and with local governments. And there is a good business opportunity and there's a huge public cry for a solution. And so we need to put it together. Right now in the United States, recycling programs are on the backs of local governments. Local governments pay for the recycling programs to happen. In the future, what policymakers are saying is we need to spread that cost burden around if we're going to see a harmonized innovation that drives that in a faster way.
But I also think we have to be realistic and honest. This is not easy. This is not an easy task to solve. And there's some testing and trialing that needs to happen, right? But it's only through that we are, let's say, building the learnings that's ultimately gonna make us successful globally in providing the solutions that are required as part of that system change that we are all part of. I think it's also very important that we are looking at who are all the actors in this space. There's no single organization or company or civil society organization or UN agency or business that can solve it alone. It's the sum of what we all are doing and the sum of the learnings of all of us that ultimately will help us moving forward. But it needs to be rooted and grounded in the right policies. And without that, we will not be successful. And that's why I think both Keefe and I are so hopeful, because the negotiations are now happening on a future legally binding treaty on plastic pollution. And that's going to be a tailwind for commitment, for funding, and ultimately for impact.
So the UN is actually taking the lead here in some of these areas, actually to gather, people that actually can do some of these changes and incentivize, but also pressure, I suppose. How will that mechanism work?
What we have not had is an even playing field. You definitely see leaders in the business space, in the country space, in the community space. You see leaders, but there is a huge gap between the early adopters and the rest of the crowd. So what's interesting about the UN's Global Plastics Treaty is that we create a common space for a base level acceptable amount of change. And from there, we get to level up the whole system, and we'll still have the folks who go above and beyond with change. But we begin to overcome some of the barriers that come with operating budgets at the community level in the US or globally.
Do you see that there will be like a COP28 of plastic recycling organized also from the top level here, or how do you see this playing out in the future?
That's exactly what the UN negotiation is all about, is how do we roll this out? What must be true is that there is a common playing field, that it is legally binding, and then the mechanisms of how we deploy that are under negotiation right now.
And governments have set a very ambitious timeline for themselves. They want to conclude the negotiations on the treaty by the end of 2024. Then there's still a few years before it will potentially enter into force and have the impact on the ground. But the political leadership is there, and this is what's going to drive. But we also have to be realistic that in parallel to the policies being negotiated and rolled out, we still need action on the ground. We cannot wait until policies are in place. And again, I think this is extremely encouraging as to what we are seeing, what the private sector is doing, what development organizations are doing, what civil society organizations are doing. And it's the sum of policy and action that's already happened that ultimately will bring us to where we want to be, where we all want to go, and that is a world without plastic pollution.
But I suppose you guys stand for the action part here, because you're actually doing things. I think that is really important to convey that message, that you cannot wait, but there are a lot of different projects going on, and new projects are coming in, both from the Alliance and from the Recycling Partnership. I think that's really important that you have a chance to speak about that.
The Recycling Partnership is 9 years old now, and we were formed because there was no entity pulling together the public and the private sectors here. And that's both the beauty and the conundrum of this recycling space, is that you've got everyone involved, from the community leaders and the business leaders and the public at large. And so as you begin to inject innovation and investment and targets through the UN, we have to think about our demographic, and our demographic is every human in this entire planet, and for the protection of all the creatures and the well-being of the planet itself. The timeline for the treaty is very fast. We cannot wait to begin the activities. So the reason that I'm engaged in these conversations as a US NGO is because I want to see the opportunity to begin to prepare for that, so that we can work on policy now, we can work on innovation now, we can work on blended finance now, so that when the treaty rolls out, we'll be ahead of the curve, not beginning the work.
I think you have said, both of you, several times here, that to get the systemic change, you need to have togetherness. Municipalities, companies, consumers, everybody in this chain has to work together. Can you just briefly describe, how you go about that? Is it, so to say, endless negotiations with people? Do you meet all of them and physically tie them together, or how do you actually do this?
Well, I think in many ways we are togetherness, right? So we are two organizations that are operating and working in the same space and are collaborating on a number of activities. But also our organizations represent togetherness, right? In the sense that we convene, in particular within the Alliance companies across the entire plastic value chain, but also work with partners at the level of government, central governments, local governments. We are working with civil society, academia, development organizations, etc., etc. So again, if we don't do it together, then that action will not happen on the ground. And I think it is all about action. We call ourselves, and you are the same in many ways, a do tank, right? It's all about getting it done. I think we probably already know what needs to get done, and there are many organizations that are focusing on what needs to get done, but there are very few that are actually doing the work on the ground. So I hope that what you are doing in the US in particular, but you're also a global organization, and what we are doing will be complemented by many others. We can't fix it alone. There needs to be many more organizations that work with governments in creating these solutions.
The Recycling Partnership is a US nonprofit. We deploy our grant resources in the US, but our data, our experience, our behavior change research, our packaging design tools, we make those available globally. And when you're in the space of collaboration, collaboration often sounds like a kumbaya word. It sounds like, some sort of harmony, but really it is hard work. And the way that we approach that is making decisions that are driven by data with a penchant for action. And then we work very hard to say the same thing to policymakers, to business leaders, to NGO leaders, to the public. We're trying to build a consistency that isn't otherwise there. We have an approach at the Recycling Partnership that we call insist and assist. That's how we lean into working with our corporate partners. And we take that in the vein of when they make a commitment around recycling or circularity, reducing waste or including recycled content, we want to hold them accountable. We insist that they deliver on that goal. But we don't just leave them to that. We assist. We also help. So we bring in our subject matter experts, our data, our experience in the field, our contacts. We're always trying to lift up through action. I hope that out of the UN treaty negotiations, what we see is a togetherness of the public and private sectors with an alignment on what good work now looks like. The enemy of this could definitely be perfection if we want to just zero in on eliminating the challenge altogether. We could set the bar too high and never achieve anything, and so we're going to keep moving forward through collaboration.
And togetherness means not only identifying the technical solutions and working with policymakers, but also working with the financial institutions. And where the Alliance comes in, and our model is to develop the solutions, test them and trial them out on the ground by us providing grants or concessional loans, de-risk them, and then make them investable for others. And that's why the engagement with development finance institutions, with private equity, is critical to take it to scale. So our individual projects that we are doing, they're not going to solve the problem at scale. It is only if we get capital, and when we work with capital that's outside what we have access to, that we will really see the magnitude of the solutions that are required in order for us to solve it.
And I think the investment sector has to work with groups that pull all the pieces together, like the partnership and other groups like ours. Otherwise, we risk the investment being a one-off instead of a building towards a common goal.
So if I'm a mayor now or a minister in a country and I say, I see you guys and I'm interested, I know I have political pressure from underneath, my voters are asking me, what do you do? What do you answer me when I come to you and say I need help? What is the first step for me to take?
I begin to look at existing policy models, different versions of extended producer responsibility models. We see that throughout Europe and parts of South America. We see it in a couple states in the United States now. And at the partnership, we have resources to help policymakers pass producer responsibility, which engages the private sector in funding an infrastructure that's robust, but also nimble to evolve for more types of recyclables. So if as a mayor, as a leader, a local leader, I think you start with what is your policy mechanism, and then you also reach out to your constituents, your public, and let them know that they have a voice that's louder than it's ever been. That not only are you, the mayor, paying attention, but companies are paying attention, and their voice of calling for a better future without plastic pollution is being heard loud and clear.
And if I can add to that one, I think we are looking at exactly the same areas. And then we are looking at local ownership. Any solution that's being put out, whether it's in the US or whether it's in Indonesia or in Vietnam where we are working, it needs ultimately to be owned by the municipality, by the local government. And without that ownership, we are not going to be able to have long-lasting solutions. We also want to see local commitment in terms of financing, right? So our resources from a national budget or local municipality budget perspective being set aside for the, let's say, for the running of the systems that we as an alliance go in and help setting up. So ownership is critical, and without ownership, we are not going to have long-lasting solutions that ultimately will be the systems that will run and run in themselves.
So you guys are really practical, and you have a lot of activities and actions, and it's, of course, there is a strategy there, but you also connect that to tactics and actions. But let us dream a little bit now. Well, so we should give us that opportunity, of course, in this, where we are actually, helping the planet to survive with this. It's big words, but I think it's also true. So let's dream. What are the 3 things you would like to see happening tomorrow that could actually change this for the better?
I mean, we want to create a circular economy for plastic. We want to ensure that plastic waste does not end up in the environment, and we want to make sure that the value of the plastic that's being used is retained. So I think from our side, what we are looking at is we are looking at the right policy context, both at the global level, but equally important at the national level. I think from our side as well, what we are looking at is innovation. How can we drive innovation and more investment into technical solutions? And coupled with that is financing. And I think the third one is education and awareness raising, behavioral change. We can have the best technical solutions in place, but without people with us understanding and want to participate and understand the reasoning for participating, we are not going to be successful. The same the other way around. We can do all the behavior change and education efforts in the world, but if we don't have then the technical solutions coupled with it, we won't be successful either. So we need to combine all of it. It's not an either or, it's a combination. And all of this needs to come hand in hand, not after each other.
So if I could wave my magic wand
yes,
and get
you can.
3 things right away. The first would be the size of the solution matches the size of the problem. In the US, we know what it will take to fix recycling. That means everyone can, everyone does, and there's infrastructure for the future. That's a $17 billion price tag. But we could fix it in 5 years, and then we could talk about something new. That $17 billion investment has a $30 billion return. So first, I want to see us set our stakes on that to use second policy to make sure that there is an even playing field in every company that produces things that the public needs, they buy, it's part of our life, but has a responsibility in ensuring that it's those materials are handled well. And then the third thing that I'd make sure is that we are approaching this through an environmental justice lens, that there is equal access to sustainable behaviors, that we are producing materials in a way that are healthy for our planet and all of its citizens, human and otherwise.
Very good. Is there anything you would like to add? Of course, there are so many things.
There are many things you could add, but I think we are all part of creating solutions here, right? This is not about the others needs to fix it, to address the issue of plastic pollution. Each and every behavior of each and every individual on this planet creates a solution. Each of our actions is part of creating solutions here. So we're all part of the solution going forward, and if we do it together, we will be successful.
I don't have patience for finger pointing. I really am interested in the people who are ready to dig in with the truth of where we are now and how are we going to get there, and are not afraid of hard work. Optimism is a virtue here, and that's why at the Recycling Partnership our staff talks about 3 virtues: courage, optimism, and badassery. We feel like those are the 3 things we need to tackle these challenges. I don't know if you'll use the badassery, but I said it.
Now, I definitely will use this, because when I came into this room today, I was, fed with a lot of doom and gloom about the future around this, that every news that you get around plastic waste is actually a negative one. Today, I got, to meet you guys, to see that you had courage, dedication, and badassery, and I think all those things has to be part of this, and I feel much more optimistic going out of this room today than I was going into it, and thank you guys for giving me that today. And I'm sure that we will meet in the future, and we will see a lot more of you down the road when the UN has taken this crucial decision about the future in the plastic recycling side. So thank you very much, and thank you guys for listening and watching us.